The day the Smiths went bankrupt, I took off the engagement ring in front of Stephen and threw it into the trash can. Stephen lightheartedly asked me, "Are you so sure that I won't make a comeback?" I stood on tiptoes and gave him one last kiss. "Don't even think about making a comeback. You'd better go pick up garbage early." 6 months later, I met Stephen at a party. He was sitting high in the main seat. Stephen had indeed made a comeback. Hearing this news, I had just been promoted to vice president at a new company, with a smile on my face and a beautiful curve on the corner of my mouth. The next moment, that curve collapsed. My assistant, who had come with me from the previous company, looked at me and cautiously asked, "Jenny, are you a little scared?" Stephen is a lunatic. I not only toyed with his feelings, but also bankrupted his family. If I remember correctly, the last time we saw each other, I threw the engagement ring he had put on me back at him and made him go pick it up like garbage. Stephen and I were never meant to cross paths. His family was in real estate, while my family dealt in scrap. No common ground in industry, and assets differed by millions. Later, his dad took a liking to a piece of land and wanted to develop a neighborhood there. Coincidentally, my family's scrap yard was located there. A shabby little factory with leaks all around. It really didn't look worth much. The people who came to negotiate initially said 50,000, then raised it to 80,000, and finally said 100,000, not a penny more. They were condescending, full of disdain. Clearly buying the land from us, yet acting as if they were giving charity. They didn't know that with our scrap yard, my family could earn a couple million a year. My parents felt they were not sincerely negotiating, so they kicked them out. 3 days later, our scrap yard caught fire, and my parents burned to death inside. They deliberately set the fire at night, wanting us dead. But that day, being playful, I was at my aunt's house and narrowly escaped the disaster. I was only 7 then, not really understanding the true meaning of death. After many days without seeing my parents, I started crying and demanding to see them. Then my aunt told me they were dead. I would never see them again. I didn't believe it. My dad was powerful, he could fulfill any request of mine. My mom loved me so much, how could she not see me? So I went to find them. I went back to the scrap yard alone. It had been turned into ruins. I stood there screaming for my parents, longing for a response that never came. Then I thought, maybe I was too disobedient normally, so they were hiding on purpose. I could pick up some bottles and waste paper. Mom said these could be sold for money. She would be happy to see this, then she would come out to see me. I spent 3 days picking up bottles and waste paper, and eventually passed out next to a garbage can. When I woke up, I was in a welfare center. The policeman said all of our relatives were unwilling to adopt me, so from then on I could only stay there. There were many children in the welfare center the same age as me, and we could play together. At first, I thought it was heaven. But as time went on, I would still miss my parents. I would always sneak out to find them, and each time I was brought back, would be scolded. Later, I would even be beaten. I was labeled as the most disobedient child in the entire welfare center. The director wouldn't let other kids play with me, and I was isolated. During study time, if someone achieved first place, the director would reward them with toys or candy. If I achieved first place, the director said I must have cheated. I was very angry, desperately trying to defend myself, but no one wanted to listen. If my mom and dad were still here, they would definitely believe me and fight for justice for me. This suffocating life continued until college. In the second semester of my sophomore year, I met Stephen. Once I knew his identity, I deliberately drew closer to him. But Stephen is a jerk. The first time I talked to him, he casually asked me, "Are you coming with me tonight?" Everyone around started cheering, and in the dim light of the private room, my face still showed a flush of embarrassment. He sneered, "Can't hang? Then don't come out to play." I had heard that although he appeared to be a player, he actually preferred innocence. The more shy and flustered I became, the deeper his gaze seemed. After that night, I began to appear frequently in front of Stephen. Although I didn't formally declare my affection, everyone knew I liked him. I even brought him a small cake. He called me stupid, I don't eat these sweet things. I pretended to be disappointed and said, I made it myself, not too sweet. But after saying that, I didn't offer it to him, turning to leave. Instead, this cake wasn't meant for him to eat, not for the son of a murderer. Stephen stopped me. I turned back, feeling a bit uncomfortable. What's wrong? Do you like me? Who would like the son of an enemy? If it weren't for that fire, my parents wouldn't have died. I wouldn't have been sent to the welfare center. I wouldn't have been beaten, scolded, and isolated. If I liked him, it was only pretending. I like you. My voice was very light, my face blushing to the point of bleeding. If you think I'm bothering you, I'll keep my distance in the future. Stephen, the farther, the better. Just as he took the bait, he was off the hook. I didn't believe it. Even if he was off the hook, I had to reel him in again. As Stephen wished, I did indeed disappear from his sight for a while. When we met again, it was in our 3rd year of college. Because I had helped a freshman singer win the title in a newcomer singer competition, I suddenly became famous and had many people confessing to me for some reason. Stephen suddenly called me and asked to meet. I said I was very busy. He coldly laughed, busy with your dates? I didn't respond. He became even more frustrated. Stephen, are you coming or not? But I have classes in the afternoon. Skipping one class won't kill you. I can only skip class for my boyfriend, no one else. After a pause, I asked him again, Stephen, do you want to be my boyfriend? I was straightforward. But then I changed my mind and was about to hang up. Before I could, he hastily said a word, yes. Yes, what? What do you mean? Stephen's tone was biting but also with a hint of compromise. I chuckled. He was a love-struck fool, or rather, a proud love-struck fool. I dated Stephen from our junior year until graduation, then we both entered his family's company together. Everything was sweet in between. How could it not be sweet? I was always at his beck and Callie even got engaged to him. Some people wondered why Stephen's parents would accept an orphan like me. The reason was simple, Stephen wouldn't have anyone else but me. He almost forced them to agree. But in the end, I dumped him and humiliated him in person. Stephen, this crazy guy, will never let me go. But isn't this meeting a bit too soon? I held hands with my boyfriend of just 3 months, entered the private room, and locked eyes with Stephen. He sat at the head of the table, looking relaxed, his expression more mischievous than when we first talked. He stared at me unblinkingly, like he was staring at prey. My boyfriend Simon had just returned from studying abroad and didn't know about my past with Stephen. He just felt Stephen's gaze on me was strange and my reaction was off. What's wrong? He softly whispered in my ear and gently touched my forehead. I definitely wasn't running a fever. Otherwise, I wouldn't have noticed Stephen's hostility so quickly. Finishing this dinner peacefully was impossible. But what did I, an innocent bystander, have to fear? Linking arms with Simon, I continued to walk forward with a smile. Why could Jenny sit here? Go to the other side, go over there. The people arranging the seating quickly came to pull me to a seat farthest from Stephen. Everyone was quite perceptive. In fact, some swiftly changed seats to occupy the spot I had hoped to take. Sensing the tension, Simon tightened his grip on my hand, silently asking, should we leave? Before I could respond, the person at the head of the table spoke first. Jenny, long time no see. Stephen's voice was as charming as ever, maybe a bit more mature and worldly wise due to some experiences. The room fell silent. Some sneaked glances at me and Stephen out of the corners of their eyes, while others pretended not to notice anything. Stephen chuckled, just half a year and Jenny doesn't recognize her fiancé anymore? As he said so, Simon and I were still holding hands. During those years of pretending to be in love with Stephen, I gradually adapted and became numb. But Simon was different, he wasn't part of this circle. Upon hearing Stephen call himself my fiancé, Simon's face darkened immediately. Sir, Jenny is my girlfriend. Please refrain from speaking nonsense. Ignoring him completely, Stephen's expression contained a hint of menace. Jenny, he called my name, gesturing for me to come over. I stared at him and slowly said, "Stephen, we've already called off the engagement. Come over." He repeated his request, his patience wearing thin. Simon pulled me behind him. "So, you're Stephen?" I interrupted Simon. Before he could finish, a transparent object suddenly flew straight toward his face. Instinctively, I pulled him away. The object hit the carpet heavily. It was a glass ashtray. If I hadn't pulled Simon away, the ashtray would have hit him square on the forehead. "Stephen, you maniac." I stormed up to him and demanded loudly, "What do you think you're doing?" He casually wiped his hands with a towel, cleaned up, and then slowly raised his eyes. "You should have come over earlier." I closed my eyes, picked up the glass of red wine in front of him, and splashed it directly on his face. "If you're not sober, then let me help you wake up." Someone gasped. Stephen just smiled. The crimson liquid slid down his face, drop by drop, staining his black shirt, giving him a more sinister look. "Jenny, you're not pretending anymore." "I'm not used to it." I left with Simon. Whether he's used to it or not, it's none of my business. Damn it, it took me a whole 7 years to achieve my goal, yet he managed to make a comeback in just half a year. As we got into the car, Simon asked me with a still shaken voice, "Jenny, who was that person?" "Stephen." "I mean, what's your relationship with him? What kind of relationship do you want?" I retorted coldly, sharp and irritable. I repelled the idea of letting more people know about my past with Stephen. I regarded it as a stain on my life. But I didn't regret having that stain. If I had the chance to redo it, I would make the same choice. Simon didn't mind that I had been engaged to Stephen. He even treated me better and more gently than before. We'd only been together for 3 months, and he already wanted to take me to meet his parents. "Jenny, if you're willing, after seeing my parents, I hope we can go meet your parents and discuss our marriage. No one has mentioned my parents to me for many years. The last time someone mentioned them was a year ago when Stephen wanted to get engaged to me, and his parents wanted to meet mine. I wanted them to meet. But my parents, being such good people, are definitely in heaven after they passed away. Stephen's parents, on the other hand, are doomed to go to hell. They would never meet. Just like me and Stephen, two people who should never have crossed paths ended up entangled, and no one would have a good ending." My phone rang, displaying an unknown local number. For a moment, I suspected it was Stephen. But it could also be a client. So I answered it. "Jenny." His voice was low and deep, with an unnervingly intimate tone. "Missed me?" I stayed silent. Stephen chuckled, then got straight to the point. "I'm sending you an address, meet me there." The address was the location of my family's abandoned factory, now turned into a well-established residential area. He sure knows how to pick meeting spots. "I'm busy." I refused him. Not even a minute after the call ended, I received a photo and a message on my phone. The photo showed my aunt's family, all held captive. Even my 3-year-old niece, who just celebrated her birthday, was there, crying with her mouth wide open. "Jenny, won't you come see what's happening to them?" "You can't do it yourself, I'll help you," I called him back. Stephen's tone was mocking. "Jenny, you're still so soft-hearted. Kidnapping is a crime. Release them immediately, I've already called the police." "You didn't call the cops." His tone was resolute. Because he knew I hated my aunt's family. After my parents died, instead of sending me to an orphanage immediately, they kept me for my parents' money. I was too young to understand or do anything at the time. Investigating the past now would just end up in confusion. My aunt even threatened, "If we don't get the money, we at least have a few lives." Neighbors said that after they got the money, they quickly renovated their house. Later, they even bought a house in that residential area. I wonder if they've had nightmares all these years, dreamt of my parents. Simon didn't want me to see Stephen. I smiled and said, "Don't worry, just wait downstairs. If I don't come out in half an hour, call the police." In this day and age, I don't believe Stephen would really dare to kill. When we got to my aunt's place, I asked Stephen to release my niece first. Seeing her reminded me of my younger self. She must be really scared. I walked over to hug her, but she moved away. My aunt and others must have spoken a lot of bad things about me, so the little girl didn't think I was a good person. It doesn't matter. I wasn't a good person to begin with. Let her go. I turned to Stephen and said. Stephen was sitting with his legs crossed, smoking a cigarette between his slender fingers. He took a drag, letting out a stream of grayish-white smoke from his thin lips, covering his face. Jenny. He couldn't remember my name before, but now he kept calling it repeatedly. But that's not my name, I don't like that name either. Stephen said, don't be rude just because I love you. I said expressionless, let the child go. A dead silence filled the room. Stephen slowly put out the cigarette in the ashtray. He stared at me as if he could devour me. After a few seconds, he spoke, you can release the child, but you have to come with me. Where to? Our honeymoon suite. He's really disgusting. I hesitated for a moment and Stephen kicked my cousin, causing him to scream in pain. Stephen calmly asked, don't want to go? How about a hotel then? Let's talk here. Fine. He quickly relented and stepped towards me. The height difference in his presence made my back tense, but I didn't budge. Stephen stood in front of me, looking me up and down. Jenny, do you still want to marry me? I knew Stephen had an eccentric way of showing love, but I didn't expect it to be this eccentric. I only have half an hour, so let's get to the point. If you can't finish, you can stay here to clean up. Stephen chuckled and interrupted me, saying, the one downstairs, I had him brought up too. I was shocked. At that moment, the door opened, and Simon was forced in. He seemed to have been beaten up, looking very disheveled. Stephen. Do you want to marry me? You're insane. He forcefully pulled me into his arms, trying to touch my face, but I turned my head away. He wasn't angry either, pointing at my aunt's family and Simon. If you don't marry me, I'll kill them all. Fine. Jenny, you're really heartless. Take your hands off me. Let's negotiate in a different way. Surprisingly, Stephen's mood was good today. He gestured and someone handed me a few papers. He showed me. Don't you want to avenge your parents? I can help you. I looked down and couldn't believe he had actual evidence. It had been so many years, many people chose to turn a blind eye and didn't want to testify, or conveniently stayed out. Much of the evidence had been wiped clean. Stephen said, Jenny, marry me, and I'll help you send in those people you want to get into trouble. Even your dad? Even my dad. Okay. I knew it was a trap, but I had been working towards this for so many years. If I could get a satisfactory result, even if it was a trap, I was willing to jump in. Simon tried hard to stop me, but he failed. As I packed my bags to move in with Stephen, Simon held onto my suitcase and wouldn't let go. Jenny, don't go, that man doesn't look like a good person. Stephen was definitely not a good person, he didn't even qualify as a normal one. Otherwise, why would he insist on marrying me? But I wasn't a good person either. I smiled and pulled away from Simon's grip. Then, without looking back, she walked towards Stephen's car. Stephen got out of the driver's seat. I thought he was coming to open the car door for me. However, in front of Simon, he pushed me against the car door and kissed me hard. After kissing me, he looked at Simon provocatively. Sensing my discomfort, he lowered his voice and said, cooperate a little, or I'll burn all that evidence up. He knew how much I hated fire, so he deliberately said those words to provoke me. Truly a jerk, his style of doing things was consistent. Although Stephen was a jerk, he kept his promises to me one by one. The ones who were involved in the arson back then, all ended up behind bars. The money my aunt took from my house was all returned without a penny missing. I heard she had to sell the house to make up for it. My aunt called me in tears, saying that they were now living as a family of 5 in a rented house, asking me to pity them. Why didn't you pity me back then? I heard that the old cop who sent me to the welfare institution back then, was very reluctant to do so. Before that, he called every relative of my family one by one. Especially my aunt, as she was very close to my dad, everyone thought she had the highest chance of adopting me. However, my aunt refused without hesitation, even crying and saying that their family was already struggling, and raising another child would destroy the whole family. At that time, she already had control over the money left by my parents. The land deal was also negotiated by her. It wasn't that she lacked the ability to adopt me, but she wanted to use that money to renovate her house. Since I wasn't her own child, she didn't care about my life at all. As long as her family prospered, and her son was fine. So, how is their family situation now related to me? Stephen had everything planned for the wedding, even the invitations were sent out. But he hadn't fulfilled the last promise he made to me yet. His father was still fine. Stephen said, "Once we're married, I'll send my dad in." "I don't believe you." He chuckled softly, pulling me into his arms from behind. "Even if you don't believe me, you have no other choice." Back then, I was able to create financial problems for Stephen's family and lead them step by step towards bankruptcy, but it was simply a matter of opportunity. But now, Stephen's love-struck mind wasn't as severe as before. He was soberly sinking. He was here to get back at me. "Jenny, I know you don't love me, but I'm going to keep you by my side, even if it tortures you for a lifetime. You won't be able to escape." The day before the wedding, Stephen's father Tony suddenly came to see me. The once prominent real estate tycoon now had a head of white hair that couldn't hide his old age, and he spoke in a humbled tone. "Jenny, please spare Stephen, okay? It's not that I won't spare him, now he's seeking revenge on me." "No, Stephen loves you so much, how could he bear to seek revenge on you?" Tony looked at me with pleading eyes. "Jenny, as long as you want, you must have a way to leave him." I sneered, "Why should I leave him? He promised me that as long as I marry him, he'll send you to jail." "Such a good son, must be the result of your accumulated virtues from your past life, right?" "Did he really say that?" Tony couldn't believe it, his voice trembling. "And I had no mercy. Yes, tomorrow we're getting married, you go to jail, isn't that very commemorative?" There seemed to be a flash of something in Tony's eyes, then it completely darkened. He lowered his head, his voice melancholic. "If I said, back then, I just tacitly agreed, and it wasn't my idea, would you believe me? Does it matter whether I believe you or not? Can my parents come back to life?" "Jenny. Don't call me." I put the cup in my hand on the table heavily, making a loud sound. Tony seemed shocked, looking up anxiously. I said my former name slowly and deliberately. "My name is Stephen." Jenny was the name given to me by the director of the welfare institution. I don't like it. The name my parents gave me is Stephen. Not long after I left the cafe, Tony left too. But he met his karma, dying in a car accident on the way. When the police called Stephen, he was in the kitchen preparing dinner for me. After a brief conversation, Stephen hung up the phone, then walked out of the kitchen. He still held a kitchen knife in his hand, his voice heavy as he asked me, "Did you meet my dad this afternoon?" Without raising my eyelids, I replied, "Yes." "What did he say?" "Let's hear the story he just made up." Stephen took a few steps forward, the kitchen knife in his hand reflecting a dazzling cold light under the lamp. The glare made me squint, and when I looked up, he was already standing in front of me. The way he held the knife made him look like a demonic figure coming to take a life. When Stephen and I arrived at the hospital, Stephen's mother was already there. As soon as she saw me, she came up and slapped me. Neither Stephen nor I were prepared, and that slap echoed throughout the corridor. As she raised her hand to give me a second slap, Stephen pulled me behind him. "Why are you hitting her? The accident has nothing to do with her." "No way. She must have done it. She got someone to run over your dad. I'm going to kill her." Stephen's mother seemed crazed, but she couldn't break free from Stephen's restraint. Finally, the second slap landed on Stephen's face. Stephen's mother was distraught, her voice hoarse. "Why did your dad and I have a son like you? She almost killed our whole family, and you still want to marry her?" "Stephen, we were the ones who owed her an apology first. I never knew about that incident. I didn't do anything wrong to her." After shouting these two sentences, Stephen's mother, for some reason, fainted. Stephen called the doctor and nurses. I stood quietly on the side. My head was pounding from the constant buzzing in my ear on the side that got hit. Stephen still had to handle his father's affairs. He was worried that if I stayed in the hospital, conflicts would arise again when his mother woke up. He said he'd send me home first. I wanted to stay here. Stephen glanced at me. I smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't let your mom hit me again, or upset her." Still not convinced, he left someone to watch over me. 2 hours later, Stephen's mother woke up. When she saw me standing by the bedside, a hint of anger flickered in her eyes, but she didn't jump up and try to hit me again. She lay there, smiling coldly and tragically. "Are you satisfied now?" "Okay then." I replied calmly. I didn't take revenge personally, so it feels like something's missing. Stephen's mother snorted. You won't have a good ending in the future." I shrugged indifferently. As she looked up at me, I gave her a brilliant smile. "But with your son accompanying me to hell, I won't be lonely. Can't you spare Stephen?" Stephen's mother's emotions flared up again. If looks could kill, I'd have died hundreds of times by now. She asked me, "Aren't you curious why Stephen turned around so quickly?" I was indeed curious and looked into it. But I couldn't find out who lent money to Stephen after being with him for 7 years. Knowing all his relationships, I couldn't think of anyone who would lend him that much money at that time. Stephen's mother revealed the answer to me. "It was the money he saved for you. He knew we didn't accept you sincerely, feared something would happen to him in the future, and you'd be left alone. So he secretly saved up enough money for you to have a worry-free life forever." Little did Stephen himself expect that the money saved for me would eventually be used for his comeback and then revenge on me. After a series of emotional fluctuations, Stephen's mother softened her tone and begged me, "Can you spare Stephen? He did nothing wrong, he genuinely loves you, please spare him." Seeing my lack of reaction, she got up from the bed and walked to the window. "If you're still not satisfied, then I'll sacrifice myself for you. Please, spare Stephen. You two won't be happy together binding each other like this." I looked at her unemotionally, trying to force me to compromise by jumping off the building. Who does she think she is? I don't care. Besides, the hospital window can only be opened a little, she can't jump off. I turned and left, leaving all her pleas behind. Stephen came back around 4 in the morning, didn't shower, and lay down with a cold chill. When he hugged me, I woke up. In the darkness, we stared at each other for a long time. Then I said, "Stephen, let's cancel the wedding." "No, your dad just passed away. It's not right to continue with the wedding at this time, right?" "It's okay, I can handle it. He's a lunatic, can't communicate at all." I pushed him away, sat up, and turned on the light. In the bright light, I saw his eyes were red. Not the tired kind of red, but he had been crying. He no longer had a father. Even lunatics would feel sad, right? "I never planned to marry you from the beginning." I got out of bed to pack my things. "I'm leaving." Stephen sat on the bed, silently watching me. When I finished packing, he came over, grabbed my hand. "Jenny, I've said that even if you don't love me, you can't leave me. Don't call me Jenny. I'm not Jenny, I am. You call me Stephen." From that day on, Stephen never called me Jenny again. He remembered my original name, Stephen. But he kept me locked up in the house. Even though the wedding couldn't take place, he wouldn't let me go. Occasionally he would take me out, but never let me out of his sight for a second. He took a long leave for me from the company, looking like he was ready to fight me to the end. I was forced to be a mess, eating and sleeping every day. Without pulling back the curtains, I couldn't tell if it was day or night outside. Without looking at my phone, I had no idea what day it was. Every day was a daze, like a walking dead. One day, Simon came to see Mehe somehow got the news, saying he wanted to take me away. I was terrified, telling him to leave quickly. Although Stephen wasn't home at the moment, he was always watching the surveillance. If he saw it, the consequences would be unthinkable. "Go away. Jenny, don't be afraid, I'm here to save you. Forget about me, just go. Stephen." Suddenly, Stephen's voice came through the surveillance. I broke out in a cold sweat. Stephen didn't speak again. But soon, I heard other sounds. It was the two vicious dogs in the backyard coming out. Simon. Run. Simon didn't know that Stephen raised vicious dogs, and he stood there in a daze. Through the glass, I watched Simon being torn apart by the vicious dogs, but I was helpless. The bright red blood reflected in my eyes, and my eyes turned red too. Stephen. Stephen. Make your dogs stop, someone will die. I won't run. I won't run. Please. The voice came through the monitor again, begging for another man. Stephen? I don't like hearing that kind of talk, you madman. You devil. I was so scared by that day's events, I had night after night of nightmares. Every time I woke up, Stephen was by my side. Sometimes he wouldn't say a word, just hold me tightly. Sometimes he would comfort me gently, don't be afraid, I'm here. My hair started falling out in clumps, my face turned a sickly pale. I lost my appetite, only taking a bite or two before feeling full and nauseous. Stephen must have feared that I would lose my mind before him. One day, he took pity on me and allowed someone to come see me. It was my assistant. She could hardly recognize me in my current state and asked, Jenny, are you okay? I was far from okay, but I couldn't tell her. If she tried to help me, Stephen would cause trouble for her. Haven't I caused enough harm to a person like Simon already? Before the assistant left, Stephen called her over and said a few words to her privately later. I asked him, what did you talk about? Stephen absent-mindedly played with my hair and casually replied, I told her to go back and not blabber, or else I'll set the dogs on her. I had no energy to even be angry and just gave him a look. That night, I dreamt of my parents. They said they were worried about me, so they came to check on me. I noticed my mom's belly was swollen and asked her what was wrong. She said, there is a little baby inside, you will soon have a younger brother or sister. My dad was overjoyed. They saw me standing there, looking lost, and quickly reassured me that even if I had a sibling in the future, they would still love me just the same. In the dream, I was still 7 years old, and they could easily lift me up. In my dad's arms, I smiled so happily, and we were a happy family. I missed them so much. I couldn't hold on anymore that night, I cut my wrists in a suicide attempt. But I didn't die. Stephen found me in the early morning when he got up to use the bathroom and saved me. I stayed in the hospital for many days. I was physically and mentally unwell. Stephen stayed with me every day, but I didn't feel like talking much. Most of the time, we were silent in each other's presence. My assistant visited me and also brought back my resignation letter. With my current condition, it was difficult to live a good life, let alone work hard. After resigning, my assistant visited me twice. But I asked her not to come anymore. Everyone who got close to me didn't have a good ending. She was a good person and should stay away from me. Later, Simon came. I didn't expect him to still be alive. He told me that he wasn't seriously injured that day, and Stephen's dog had ended up playing with him like a toy, not really biting him. It was just that the initial bites had bled too much, leaving blood everywhere, which looked horrifying, and at that time, I was already mentally unstable, scaring myself. You're okay, really, it's all good. I felt a long-lost normal emotion and I was excited. Simon smiled and told me not to feel guilty. Then he glanced outside and asked me, didn't you really love at all? Love anyone? Stephen? Honestly, I couldn't tell. In the 7 years of the past, did I ever mix reality and act? Did his kindness really never confuse me? Why did I feel upset seeing him getting quieter day by day? Simon talked to me for a long time that day before leaving. But after he left the ward, Stephen took a long time before coming in. Simon must have said something to him, or else he wouldn't have let me go later. But before letting me go, Stephen asked me to have a wedding photo shoot with him, just one photo. I initially refused. He looked deeply into my eyes, had a smile on his face, but his voice was hoarse. After today, you can leave me forever, is it not worth a smile? I couldn't force a smile during the wedding photoshoot. The photographer cracked several jokes to make me smile, but it didn't work, and the atmosphere became awkward. Later, Stephen whispered in my ear, "After today, you can leave me forever. Isn't it worth a smile from you?" I managed a smile to save face, and the photographer captured it. After the photo was developed, Stephen kept it in a safe. Many late nights, he would sit alone in his study quietly gazing at that photo. On the day I was leaving the country, Simon came to see me off. He said his family had introduced him to a girl who had a resemblance to me, and he liked her a lot. He asked if I would come to his wedding in the future. I probably wouldn't be coming back after leaving. But I said, "Your wedding is important, so I will definitely come back for it." "Okay then. I'm off. Have a safe journey." After boarding the plane, I took out my phone to turn it off. At that moment, Stephen sent me a photo. A tall man stood in front of the huge glass wall at the airport, gazing intently at something. That silhouette reminded me of the person I saw at the glass wall in college during my sophomore year. Except, back then, he was radiant, but now he seemed a bit lonely. Tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't bring myself to look more, so I switched off my phone. "Stephen, I'm sorry. Goodbye." Stephen's epilogue: I had planned to tough it out with Emily for a lifetime. If she went crazy, I would be there with her. If she wanted to live well, I would live well with her. However, I didn't expect her to attempt suicide. That night, I saw her lying weakly on the ground, crimson blood continuously flowing from her body, covering the floor. I admit, I was scared. Rather than trapping her with me for a lifetime, I seemed to want her to live well. Simon said, "If you truly love someone, you wouldn't hurt them like this. You wouldn't bear to watch them die." Emily lost her parents at a young age and has been suffering all these years. It was time for her to turn the corner. Stephen asked me, "Is it better to separate through life or through death?" He was right. If I kept Emily by my side, one mistake could lead to losing her forever. Though separation was painful, at least she was still alive, somewhere in this world. Maybe we will meet again after years apart. But perhaps she wouldn't want to see me. It's fine. If I ever see her again, that would be enough. She doesn't need to see me. I loved her, but we couldn't face each other anymore. Although his father wasn't the mastermind, he was an accomplice. He allowed the arsonists to act and later helped cover up some of the crime evidence. I still think his car accident was karma. Their family's debt to ours was repaid when his father died. Yet, once things happen, they leave their traces. My parents' deaths, his father's death, will always stand between us. If we can't move past the chasm, we don't need to gaze at each other anymore. Couldn't let go, but we can let things pass.